We're honored to have with us today Congressman Eliot Engel from New York, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman Engel, thanks for joining the Jerusalem Post conference.
Great to be with the Jerusalem Post. I read it often.
Okay, we're happy. I want to start with you with what's happening right now in the United States. Was recently the historic Abraham Accords that were reached between Israel and the UAE. I know that you've spent a lot of your career in trying to bridge those ties between Israel and countries throughout the Gulf. What's your take on the significance of these accords, and what should we expect going forward?
Well, it's very significant. First of all, I was pleased to be at the White House for the signing ceremony. I've waited my whole life for this, and it's just a wonderful thing to see. You know, when I became a chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and even a few years before that, whenever I would have Sunni Arabs come to visit with the heads of state, they always said the same thing the Israelis said. They were worried about Iran. They looked at the Middle East in the same prism. And I even said to them, you know, you ought to work with Israel, because whether it's the enemy, my enemy is my friend, or whether it's these hatreds don't really have any relevancy anymore, you really work together. And they're doing it now. And I think it's wonderful. And I hope more countries join in. I think Iran has to be isolated, and I think we're on our way to doing it.
You think the Saudis will come to the table?
I think it's inevitable that the Saudis will come to the table. Look, there are things about Saudi Arabia that rub me wrong and rub other people wrong. But the fact of the matter is, they are an important country. The Crown Prince has told me personally that he wants to enhance relations with Israel. And while there were things with Mr. Khashoggi, who thought it was disgraceful and disgusting, back a while, I think inevitably Saudi Arabia rises as a power in the region, and we have to work with them, and Israel has to work with them.
Of course. I want to ask you, though, about the qualitative military edge, about the QMB. There's reports that the President Trump and the administration wants to sell F-35s to the Emiratis. Are you concerned what that might mean for the significance or Israel's edge in the region?
Very concerned. And I expressed my concern to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who called me on the phone to congratulate me for the years I've served in Congress. I'm concerned about it because once you lose that qualitative military edge, it's like a slippery slope. We have to be very, very careful. We need to work with these countries. They are allies, and they're potential allies to Israel, but we just cannot do anything that could potentially cause Israel to lose the QME. And so I'm very concerned.
Right. You know, a lot has been said about the relationship between Israel's prime minister and the U.S. president. Too close for comfort, maybe, what it might do to the bipartisan relations. And you've been a champion of bipartisan ties for Israel. You're on the Democratic side, but you've always spoke about the importance of how Israel retains that bipartisan support. Has that been eroded? You see what's happening in your party, the so-called squad, some of these more fringe extreme elements that are not coming to power within the party. Should Israelis be concerned with what's happening?
Well, I would say yes and no. First of all, we're always concerned because we want to make sure that the bonds between the U.S. and Israel remain strong. So we're concerned. And there are elements in both parties, I would say, frankly, that do things that could hurt the U.S.-Israel relationship. But it is a problem and a question with the extreme left in the Democratic Party. And we have to monitor that carefully. Now, you take a look, though, I think there are 31 Jewish members of Congress, and I believe that 28 or 29 of the 31 are Jewish. So we've got strong support on both sides of the aisle. And Israel should not be a political football where there's gotcha politics and forcing one party or another to vote a certain way and then say, aha, you see, they're not really pro-Israel. We have to work together. We have to work together. I believe for peace to come in the Middle East. We need to work together to isolate Iran. We need to work together to make sure that Israel retains the qualitative military. So I'm not in big favor of the gotcha resolutions on, but concern for the drifting of the Democratic Party. I'm concerned, but we have a nominee, Joe Biden, who's always been excellent when it came to support of Israel. And I believe that the people who are influential in the party want to continue to see strong U.S.-Israel ties. And I keep my mouth shut. If I see something going the way that I don't like of either party,
right.
I'm going to raise.
Right. I want to ask you, Congressman Engel, just as we finish up, you're ending your term come November. You'll be stepping down after years in Congress and really, like I mentioned before, a champion of Israeli-U.S. ties. So first of all, let me just say thank you as an Israeli citizen for everything that you've done. But when you look back at this long career, what do you take? What's that? If there's a moment or a moment of pride that you can say, I take this away when it comes to the Israel-U.S. relationship, is there one thing that you can put your finger on?
Well, there were so many things. I take pride in the fact that the U.S. and Israel are closest friends. I take great pride in the fact that, it doesn't really matter to me who's elected or who's not elected. I want this U.S.-Israel relationship to be so strong, and it's stronger than any other bond. And I think we've done that. I think I've been a good, strong part of it through the years to give Israel all its needs, all its military needs, all it needs to keep them safe. I remember resolution after resolution on the House floor. Israel was attacked from the Sinai. We replenished everything they needed while the war was going on. We were right there. And so I'm just proud of the fact that both parties, by and large, support Israel. And I was important, I believe, in helping to make that happen.
Well,
Congress.
Yes. Well, Congressman Eliot Engel, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I want to thank you for being with us at the Jerusalem Post Conference. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll keep reading the paper.
Okay. Fantastic. You got a deal. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Congressman. I appreciate it. And thanks again, really, for your service. Thank you. Okay. Take care. We're honored to be joined by Republican Senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, for an interview with Herb Keinon, senior contributing editor.
Thank you. We now have with us Senator Ted Cruz, the Republican senator from Texas. Thank you, Senator, for being with us today.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
About a week and a half ago, you were among those who participated in the ceremony on the White House lawn where Israel, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates signed a normalization pact, a peace pact. What significance do you see in that in the long term for the Middle East?
Well, it's historic. It has been decades since we've seen this kind of movement towards peace. And I believe this movement is the direct result of American strength and resolve and clarity with regard to our relationship with Israel. In many ways, what we saw at the signing of the Abraham Accords is the fruit of what occurred in 2017, where the Trump administration made what I think were the two most important foreign policy decisions of the entire first term. The first was the decision to move our embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, and the second was to withdraw from the disastrous Iranian nuclear deal. Both of those, I believe, set the stage for everything that has happened up until and including the Abraham Accords signed in D.C. On moving the embassy, as you know, we'd seen presidents from both parties. We'd seen Republicans and Democrats promise to move our embassy to Jerusalem. And unfortunately, presidents from both parties had broken those promises. When President Trump came into office, there was a vigorous debate within the administration about whether to move the embassy. Both the State Department and the Defense Department opposed moving the embassy. Both Rex Tillerson and Jim Mattis said, do not move the embassy. They said it would enrage the enemies of Israel, and it would impede the cause of Middle East peace. And I leaned in vigorously with the president, disputing that proposition. And in fact, the argument I made to the president back in 2017 is that if we move the embassy to Jerusalem, that will be heard by our friends and by our enemies as unequivocally making clear that we stand with Israel, period, the end. And that clarity, in turn, is the necessary precondition for peace. It will be the prerequisite to peace. I made that argument, and the president made a courageous decision. He overruled his own State Department, his own Defense Department. He agreed with me. He moved the embassy. And I'll tell you, I had the incredible honor to be there in Jerusalem at the opening of the embassy on the 70th anniversary of the creation of the modern state of Israel. It was powerful and important, and it led to all of the progress we've seen in the years since.
Senator, so I want to understand this. Are you saying you're drawing a direct line from the move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to the signing of these agreements, the Abraham Accords? I mean, what's the connection? Why did that move the Bahrainis and the Emiratis to want to have ties with Israel?
Because clarity is power. And in the Middle East, people respect strength and not weakness. If you can be bullied, militarily, or if you can be bullied by the New York Times and CNN, then you're not respected. And you know, if you look at during the 8 years of the Obama-Biden presidency, sadly, it was marked by consistent actions from the U.S. president undermining Israel. And that ambiguity only encouraged the enemies of Israel and the enemies of America. I think they are one and the same. Those who hate Israel hate America. And I think there is great virtue in drawing clear lines in the sand, in being clear and straightforward. And I'll tell you what I actually urged the president when he announced the moving of the embassy. I said, you know, our Arab friends, the Emiratis, the Saudis, the Egyptians, they'll publicly denounce moving the embassy. They'll feel they have to for domestic political reasons. But I argued at the time, I said, secretly, they will be overjoyed. Because what they will say is, you know, an American administration that has the courage, that has the backbone to move the embassy, despite all the criticism they know they'll get, maybe, just maybe, will also have the courage and backbone to pull out of the disastrous Obama-Iran nuclear deal. And I think that deal is the most catastrophic decision in foreign policy of modern times. And the fight over the Iran nuclear deal paralleled the fight over the embassy. The same battle lines were drawn. Both state and defense argued, do not pull out of the deal. Both Mattis and Tillerson leaned in hard and said, do not pull out of the deal. Once again, I leaned in vigorously with the president, urging him to pull out. I don't think it was a coincidence that within a week of our opening our embassy, the administration announced we were pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. And for our Arab neighbors, nothing helped clarity more than the prospect of the Ayatollah with nuclear weapons, which they recognize poses an existential threat. And I'll tell you, if you want to know the connection between the clarity in 2017 and today, I've spoken in the past couple of weeks with the UAE ambassador. I've spoken with the Saudi ambassador. In both instances, I thank them, UAE for normalizing, the Saudis for allowing Israeli overflights, which they haven't done before. And that was a significant move towards peace and normalization. And I'll tell you what both of them said. They said the exact same thing, which is we want to be friends with America, that we've seen that America cares about standing with Israel, and that if we make nice with Israel, America will make nice with us. That is exactly the clarity that I had urged in 2017, and we're seeing it come to fruition.
But Senator, so what happens now? We're a month and a half before the elections in America, and let's say that President Trump doesn't win the election, and you have Joe Biden as president. What happens to that clarity? What do the Saudis and what do the Bahrainis and what do the Emiratis do then?
I don't know. I am worried about it. I think one of the worst political consequences of the Iran nuclear deal is in the U.S. Congress. It politicized our relationship with Israel much more than it had previously, that the Obama administration essentially told congressional Democrats, you pick. You either stand with Israel or you stand with the Democratic Party. And far too many congressional Democrats chose to stand with their party. That dynamic is dangerous. If you look at the Democratic Party, there are some vocal anti-Semitic voices on the far left that are in the ascension, that if Biden wins, that will have a serious and vocal role. I think it spoke volumes that after the 2016 election, after it was clear Donald Trump was going to be president, that the outgoing step that President Obama and Vice President Biden took was to orchestrate the UN passing Resolution 2334, a blatantly anti-Israel resolution predicated on a mountain of lies, claiming much of modern Israel is illegally occupied territory, claiming the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem is illegally occupied territory, claiming the Wailing Wall is illegally occupied territory. That should never have happened. A strong America should have vetoed that. And not only did Biden not veto it, but behind the scenes, they quietly orchestrated it. I think those are the voices that would be in ascension in a Biden presidency. So I worry about it considerably. Now, does that mean that UAE or Bahrain, after normalizing, are going to break off relations? No, I don't think that will happen. But I think the incentives for players in the region to improve their relationships with Israel will plummet, because if the United States returns to a posture of moral ambiguity, of diplomatic ambiguity, then suddenly the upside for changing the status quo drops substantially.
Senator, we have just time for one more question, and this is something you touched on, and that's the politicization of support for Israel. I mean, one of Israel's biggest assets historically has been that it's bipartisan. It's kind of seen as a bipartisan issue. Do you feel in the Senate that this is slipping, and what can Israel do to retain it?
So I'm concerned about it. I think it clearly is slipping. I think the price of the Iran nuclear deal was a serious damaging of the democratic part of the bipartisanship. I think it's important for America and Israel for the support to remain bipartisan. You know, when I was elected to the Senate 8 years ago, I resolved to be the strongest defender of Israel in the United States Senate. And that's something I've worked very hard to do, whether it is fighting for Iron Dome funding, whether it is fighting to acknowledge the Golan Heights as part of Israel, which I led the fight for, and the president again agreed with me and recognized that reality on the ground. I'll close actually with a bit of optimism, which is, you may recall a little over a year ago when there were several anti-Semitic comments from some of the far left Democrats in the House, and they were really beyond the pale. And Nancy Pelosi at the time tried to pass a resolution condemning anti-Semitism, just a simple, straightforward resolution passing anti-Semitism. Pelosi believed she could get it through, that her conference would support it. Unfortunately, the Democratic conference fractured. They fought amongst themselves. They couldn't agree on a simple statement condemning anti-Semitism, so they ended up passing a very bland statement condemning hatred of every kind. When I saw that, I thought it was important that the Senate does better and that we actually see bipartisan agreement in the Senate. So I drafted a resolution condemning anti-Semitism. I joined with Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia. We wrote it together. It clearly and unequivocally condemns anti-Semitism. It condemns BDS. It condemns in explicit terms the anti-Semitic comments given by those leftist freshmen in the House. And that resolution in the Senate ended up passing the Senate 100-0. So every Democrat, every Republican supported it. I give that as a moment of encouragement that even in tense partisan times, personally, I'm hopeful that President Trump is reelected. I'm working to help him be reelected. But regardless, I'm going to be fighting to continue to strengthen our relationship with Israel and stand by our friend and ally. I think it is in America's interest, and I think it's in the interest of our allies.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate you being with us.
Absolutely.
And now we're in for an exciting debate. Our next session is called Red or Blue, the Jewish Vote. Will be moderated by Herb Keinon, the Jerusalem Post senior contributing editor.
Thank you, Haley Seifer, the Executive Director of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, and Matt Brooks, Executive Director of the Republican Jewish Coalition. Thank you both for being here. About a month and a half before the elections? to talk about how the Jews will or should vote. Haley, let me start with you. We have a U.S. president who's moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, who recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, who pulled the U.S. out of the Iranian nuclear deal, something the Israeli government was very pleased that he did, who's given Israel tremendous support in the international arena, put out a peace deal that's the most favorable peace deal any American president has ever given to Israel, and now has brokered this peace deal with the UAE and Bahrain. Why should not Jews who support Israel vote for President Trump?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us today. Thank you for bringing me and Matt together. We don't do this often, and Shana Tova. So what we have in this election is actually a candidate who has a longer and stronger pro-Israel record than any presidential candidate in our history, and that's Joe Biden. Joe Biden was elected to the Senate in 1972, and he has been working on these issues to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship and solidify the $38 billion 10-year memorandum of understanding or military aid assistance agreement going back to the Obama administration. And even before then, as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Joe Biden was unwavering in his support of Israel's security, its right to self-defense, its qualitative military edge. He understands the Jewish community, and the Jewish community supports him. There's a poll that came out last week that shows the Jewish community and Jewish voters overwhelmingly support Joe Biden on every issue, including Israel. And we know that the issues that are driving the Jewish vote in this election, such as our own rising insecurity under this president, whether it's due to the unprecedented increase of anti-Semitism or now our own health insecurity. And today we passed the solemn marking of 200,000 Americans dead. Jewish voters are voting on these issues. And for that, they blame Donald Trump and they trust Joe Biden.
Matt, let me turn that question around. Trump has been consistently accused of winking towards white supremacists, Charlottesville being Exhibit A. He's been accused of not living up to the principles that many American Jews hold dear, and that would be like immigration. He hasn't necessarily comported himself both in behavior and speech in a way that goes together with Jewish values. Why should Jews vote for him?
Well, first, Herb, thank you for having both Haley and I, and I agree that it's always a pleasure to get together either in person or, unfortunately, in these times, virtually. And to all your viewers, a very happy and healthy New Year, Lashana Tova. Let me sort of address the question from a couple different perspectives, if I may. First of all, there is no question, go back to your original point, that the Jewish community respects and understands that Donald Trump is the most pro-Israel president ever in history, bar none. It does not then comport that on one hand, he's the most pro-Israel president in history, and on the other hand, as Haley and the Democrats would like to say, somebody who nurtures and supports and winks or dog whistles toward anti-Semitism. In fact, the opposite is abundantly clear. This president is the most outspoken president in history when it comes to standing up against anti-Semitism. He signed an historic executive order protecting college students from anti-Semitism on campus. And you mentioned Charlottesville. And I think this is something we have to address clearly and put to rest the lying and the misrepresentation that is going on as part of this Democratic mythology. Go back and look at the transcript. This president clearly, unambiguously denounced white supremacists and Nazis. The notion that he said there are good people on both sides as it relates to white supremacists and Nazis clearly doesn't clearly is not consistent with the record in the transcript if you go back and look at it. There has been no president who has stand more shoulder to shoulder with the Jewish community in combating anti-Semitism than Donald Trump. And there is no president that is going to help protect Jews from anti-Semitism than Donald Trump, especially at a time when the Democratic leadership in this country is working to defund the police. We need a strong police force to help protect our community, make us safe and secure. And that's another reason why the Jewish community is going to be embracing this president.
Haley, you mentioned the polls. I saw a poll, I think it was last week, by the Jewish Electorate Institute, saying that Biden would get 67% of the Jewish vote, a bit down from Clinton's 71% last time, but that Trump would get 30% of the Jewish vote, up some 6% from what it was in 2016. With all the noise surrounding this president, I mean, how do you account for that? That 6% more Jews are likely to vote for him, and this could be actually significant in states like Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, which are swing states, and the Jews could have a real say there.
Great point.
Well, there's no question that the Jewish vote matters. We are 2% of the population, but 3% of the electorate. And of course, the Jewish vote will make a difference in this election, as it has in past elections. But when we look at that poll that came out by the Jewish Electorate Institute last week, we also look at the poll that came out by the same institute in February. Donald Trump's numbers were exactly the same in February, and Joe Biden's favorability has increased by 10 points. So the biggest takeaways from that poll is that despite the fact that Donald Trump has done everything to win over Jewish voters, to include this UAE deal, nothing is working. Literally nothing is working to increase his favorability, which actually went down by 1 point since February with Jewish voters. And that is because the other thing this poll shows is that Jewish voters trust Joe Biden more on every single issue, including Israel. And that's why they're overwhelmingly going to vote for Joe Biden. Now, the small margin that you're mentioning between these numbers, which came out more than 50 days before the election, and the exit polls from 2016, let's see, we can make up for that. But what is more significant is that Donald Trump's numbers have not changed. And that's because Jewish voters don't trust him.
Matt, how come more Jews aren't voting for Trump? 30% after all he's done for Israel. How do you explain that?
Well, first of all, 30% is a huge increase from where we were in 2016. I have been absolutely clear on this. In fact, I have a lot of bets out, including with Aaron Kiak, who is running the Biden Jewish outreach effort, that this president will do better among Jewish voters in 2020 than he did in 2016. A lot of pundits were saying he was going to get the lowest share of the Jewish vote ever in history. But because the Republican Jewish coalition is spending millions of dollars and has been for the last year and a half, we are seeing a significant increase. President Trump, if these numbers hold, will be at near historic highs for Republicans. I fully concede that the Democrats will get a majority of the Jewish vote. That's not what we're competing for in this election. Because if we're getting 30% of the Jewish vote nationally, I can assure you that in battleground states like Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, for instance, we're getting higher than that. The Upper West Side, Upper East Side liberal Jews in LA are pulling that whole average down. But when you poll in the battleground states, we're doing significantly higher. And I will tell you, if you look at 2018 at Governor DeSantis's race, he got a historic high of 35% of the Jewish vote. Herb, he won that race in Florida by 40,000 votes. There is no way he would not have won without that huge increase among Jewish voters. And we're going to see that again in 2020 with President Trump, and he will be decisive. The Jewish vote will be decisive in him carrying Florida.
We've only got time for one last question. I'm sorry. And I'm just going to ask you both, and we got about a minute and a half left. So please just keep the answer to this quick. Netanyahu went to Washington last week. He did not make any attempt either to meet or call Joe Biden. Haley, was that a mistake? Matt, was that a mistake? Haley, please.
The U.S.-Israel relationship has historically been bipartisan, and it's extremely important that it continue to be that way. We have never seen the U.S.-Israel relationship politicized to the extent that we have seen this under Donald Trump. But I would like to say one thing to my friend, Matt Brooks. You can add me to the list of those that you are betting, because you mentioned the 2018 election where Donald Trump received just a mere Republicans received 17% of the Jewish electorate. I think the Republicans will get even less than Donald Trump got in 2016 in this election, because we also in the United States now have an historic moment in our history where we have lost a Supreme Court justice. We all mourn the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And now we know, just as it did in 2018, the Supreme Court and who the president appoints to the Supreme Court will drive Jewish voters to the polls. It impacted the 2018 election. It will impact the 2020 election. And it's one of the reasons I'm very confident to say, Matt, you can add me to the bet. I don't think Donald Trump will get even 24% as he did in 2016.
You are on. We'll bet a lunch, but I guarantee you it's the easiest bet that I've ever won in my life, because there is no question, Herb, that this president will do better among Jewish voters. I guarantee it. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I understand how the Jewish community thinks. I understand how they vote. I understand how they act. This president will do better in 2020 than he did in 2016, and significantly.
How about the Ginsburg effect, though? Is there a Ginsburg effect here that this might drive Jews to vote Democratic? A concern over the Supreme Court?
I don't know that this is an issue. Obviously, we mourn, as I said in my tweets, Justice Ginsburg was a trailblazer and somebody who had a profound impact on this country, and we all mourn this loss. But I don't know that in the Jewish community that's going to be an issue. That's going to help decide undecided Jewish voters. I think it's going to reinforce. For Haley's folks, their need to turn out and to energize their base. And for our folks, it's going to do the same thing. But I don't think this debate is going to have a huge impact ultimately on how the Jewish vote itself is going to play out. Okay.
Thank you both very much. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we don't. Just hope we'll have another month and a half and see how it all plays out. Thank you.
Toda, Herb. Thank you.
Ta-da.
Thank you. Bye, Matt.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Haley.